Hello BIO178. In this video I will give an explanation of the first section of our group project poster, which is the study sites. So this is an example poster from one that I actually presented during my PhD. So this is a template that I provided for you on Canvas. What you can do, I left my information in there just for you to see for reference, but you can delete that, add in your group's content as appropriate. And what we'll focus on in this video here is this study site section. So what should be in a study site section, or what is the purpose of this section? Really what it's doing is it describes the geographic sites where samples were collected or obtained from. All right, so that's generally what information is contained within this study site section. What specifically should you include in this section? First of all, you should include a sampling map with a figure caption. So that's an example here on the right. This is a map that I created and I used for most of my posters. So there's a map which is the California, and then I've indicated along the coast of California the 6 different sites where I collect my samples from. And so what are you doing? My dog is trying to climb in my lap while I'm filming this. So this is the sampling map, and then the figure caption that's associated with that sampling map is here. So an example might be figure 1. So you want to make sure you number your figure. Your sampling map is a figure on your poster. And so it will likely be figure 1. And you can say something like figure 1 collecting sites used in this study. So that's an example of what a sampling map with associated figure caption might look like. That's one thing you have to put in your study site section. Also to note, depending on your project, it might be that you just have one site where your samples were collected from, and that's fine. So this is going to look a little bit different for the different group projects, but just make a sampling map with figure caption that's appropriate for your group's particular study. And then along with that sampling map, we also want to include a written description. So this is an example, again, from that poster example template I showed at the beginning. That's a poster I've actually presented before. And so it might say something like Sipha nebralis, which is the species you're working with, were collected from, in this case, 3 Northern California sites. You list those sites, and from 3 Southern California sites, you list those sites. Now, a couple things to point out here. First of all, you want to make sure that in your written description, you're referencing that figure 1, which is that sampling map with caption we just talked about. So in your written description in the study site section, make sure you're referencing your figure 1. Another thing you might notice here is that I used color coding. So I used blue to indicate the geographic site names or population names for the Northern California sites, and I used red to indicate the Southern California sites. So this is something that one of my friends in grad school recommended to me, and I've used it for everything I've presented ever since. I think it's really helpful to use color coding like this to help your audience who's unfamiliar with this system like you are. So you might be hear the name and you say, oh, I know that's a Northern California site. But an audience member who hasn't thought about this work before won't know that as well as you will. So color coding things is a really nice way to help the reader or your audience member keep track of what's what. So you can use color coding if you have different sites, if you have different species you're comparing. I think the color coding really helps as a visual way to help the reader follow along. And then another thing to note, in terms of how long this written description should be, you may have noticed that this actually is not very long. So your whole written description should be about 50 words, and that's about 1 to 2 sentences long. So the section really, word count wise, is relatively short, but you're just briefly describing where your samples were collected from. So So this is a full example of what that might look like when you put it together in this little section of your poster. So we have the written description here on the left, and then on the right-hand side, we have that sampling map, which is our figure 1, along with that figure 1 caption. All right, so that's what should be contained there, what an example looks like, but how should you actually go about writing this section in your groups? The first thing I recommend is making sure you review the information on Canvas. So on Canvas, what I've done is provided each of your groups a project-specific data page, and this is in the Tuesday, November 17th module. And so each of your groups has a specific data page that contains not only the data that you need for the analysis to do the actual analysis, it also contains background information, any supplementary methods that were used to obtain the samples that will give you information about the study sites. So make sure you review this information on Canvas to gain some familiarity with the data set you're working with. That's going to contain information that you need to then write this study sites section for your group project poster. So the other thing you'll have to do is create some kind of sampling map for your project. And there are a couple different ways to do this. One thing you can do is just use our good friend Google, and what you can do, like here I just have a screenshot, I googled blank map of California. You can find a blank map, take that image, copy it into PowerPoint, and then what I've done in the past, this is a low-tech way, but it works for me. On top of that image you insert in PowerPoint, you can add text boxes and shapes on top of that image to indicate those different sampling sites. And then you can save that as a PDF and you can insert that into your poster. So that's, again, kind of the low-tech way, but it has worked for me in the past, so it'll work. Another way you can do this, if you want to be a little bit fancier, you can use Google My Maps. And this is a way for you to use Google Maps, which exists already, but then you can overlay on top of that the specific sites you want to focus on. So there's actually a tutorial I linked to a tutorial for how to use Google My Maps in the optional study sites draft assignment that's contained within this module. So if you want to use Google My Maps but you haven't used it before, there's a link to a tutorial that can help explain that for you. And then lastly, once you've done those things, all you need to do is write your description. Remember, that's about 50 words, 1 to 2 sentences, and then you can put that all together and you will have your full study site section.